Just give everyone a few seconds to join and then we'll get started. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Center for European Policy Studies. I'm Zach Pakin, and I'm a researcher in the EU Foreign Policy Unit here at CEPS, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all this morning for a discussion on EU-Turkey relations that will be building on some of the work that we did at our CEPS Ideas Lab back in June. But now we're going to be looking a little bit beyond the Mediterranean theater and looking at the wider Eurasian and Indo-Pacific theater and try to explore some potential avenues for EU-Turkey horizons, as well as cooperation down the road. And for this very timely topic, we're very fortunate to have with us four excellent panelists today. But before I introduce them, just a reminder to all of our participants who are joining us online via Zoom, you can pose questions today using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I assume that everyone at this point in the pandemic is acquainted with the features of Zoom. So there we are. Our four panelists who are joining us today. First of all, joining us from Points Beyond is Michael Tanchum, and he is a Senior Associate Fellow at the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, or AIES, in Vienna, as well as a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in DC, and an Associate Senior Policy Fellow in the Africa Program at the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR. Michael, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, pleasure.
Joining us from Istanbul this morning is Senem Aydin Düzgit. She is Senior Scholar at the Istanbul Policy Center, as well as Professor of International Relations at Sabancı University. İyi günler.
Merhaba, hello. Nice
Merhaba.
to be back at CEPS.
Joining us remotely from Brussels is Isabella Ioannidis. She is Senior Policy Analyst at the European Parliament, as well as Research Associate at the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, or ELIAMEP, in Athens. Kalimera, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
And finally, joining us here in studio at the CEPS office in central Brussels is Seda Gürkan. She is a lecturer at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, as well as a visiting scholar at the Free University of Amsterdam. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Thanks so much for being with us. So I think we're going to start with you, Senem. You're in Istanbul this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, in your case. I was wondering if you could give us your take on the major developments in Turkish foreign policy over the past few months.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Zach, and thanks again very much for inviting me today. Now, I will keep it extremely short, as you asked us to be super brief and very short and concise. So if we're going to focus on the last few months only, I can say that I think we're now going through a rather de-escalation phase in Turkish foreign policy, especially concerning Turkey's recent actions in the Eastern Mediterranean and this growing rift with the European Union. We see that recently there has been more de-escalation on this front. And also less of an emphasis so far on foreign policy and more in terms of more emphasis on domestic politics. I mean, I think part of the de-escalation has to do with the current political dynamics within Turkey, which is rather, tumultuous, to say the least. And economically also, of course, I'm sure that most of you have been watching how the Turkish economy has been doing recently, especially in terms of the value of the Turkish lira against the dollar and the euro, and the rising rates of inflation. And these have been such huge domestic concerns and policy priorities of the government as well, that foreign policy has somehow been delegated somewhere to the back burner. And I think part of that de-escalation has to do with that. The primacy of domestic politics and economy at the expense of foreign policy priorities. So what we see as a part of that, also some efforts to rebuild some of the previous alliances or damaged relationships. For instance, we have seen the recent visit of the UAE officials to Turkey, which I think was a major development, given the sour relationship, to say the least, between EU and Turkey and UAE in the recent years, and even some attempts to build bridges with Egypt and Israel as well. So we are seeing, a turn towards a bit more diplomacy and de-escalation and the major conflicts. But I think much of that has to do with the way in which the Turkish government is being squeezed more and more domestically, with with loss of domestic support almost every day, as the public opinion polls have been telling us. Now, of course, we're not sure, and I don't think we can be sure that this is sustainable, though, because I think the current state of their Turkish domestic politics always runs the risk of creating some foreign policy crisis or cultivating some foreign policy crisis to bolster domestic support for the government at home. That, I think, is a serious risk that we should be contemplating for the future months, as the Turkish economy becomes more strained and as the government becomes more pressured, especially by the rise of the opposition and given its declining performance in government. I think that's something that EU, but also other players, need to watch for. I think, these should be okay for the opening statements, but I can elaborate on these and other issues as we go along, Zach.
For sure. Thank you so much for helping bring our audience up to speed. And I neglected to mention in the introduction that you are also a CEPS alumna, so it's wonderful to welcome you back here as well, even if virtually. Seda, I was wondering if you could also provide your take. What are some of the major causal drivers behind Turkish foreign policy today?
Well, first of all, Zach, thank you very much for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to join you today. I'm very happy to be part of this collective thinking on EU-Turkey relations with wonderful colleagues. I have been following EU-Turkey relations from Brussels for 20 years now. This period roughly corresponds to AKP's coming to power, and there have been several ups and downs, emotions and crises, and then hopes towards the betterment of these relations. But in my view, in 2020, relations really have reached a historical low point. Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, tensions have cooled down since last summer, but in my view, there is no chance of improvement in relations in the near future. Maybe before responding to your question, I will take just one step back and contextualize a little bit Turkish foreign policy. Obviously, I will not talk about the domestic trends on Turkey, but the whole context in which the EU neighborhood, the EU operates, has changed dramatically. The neighborhood has shifted, and the many countries in the neighborhood have slided towards autocracies. But the change in Turkey has been dramatic, and Turkey is the extreme example of autocratization in the EU's neighborhood. I think it's very crucial understanding this profound transformation of Turkey, domestic politics in Turkey, for a little bit understanding what's happening in Turkish foreign policy and whether these changes in the last 6 months are sustainable or not. I think as of 2021, there are four main characteristics of Turkish foreign policy, and I will not go into detail, but I'm happy to expand on these points in our Q&A or in a follow-up question. First of all, Turkey now is more inclined to take unilateral action in its region. I mean, we have seen this in Syria, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and these operations are usually launched with no consultation at all with allies, as it was the case traditionally with the NATO framework or bilaterally. So Turkey is more confident, it's more inclined to take unilateral action in its region. Second point, Turkey has started to use a more assertive foreign policy to further its interests. Here, I want to say that Erdogan is following a kind of balancing strategy, which is characterized by pivoting between major actors, usually between the European Union, the Trump administration, Russia versus the European Union. So Turkish foreign policy is increasingly marked by balancing strategies. So rapprochement with one actor at the expense of the other, blackmailing, intimidation, provocation, and bluffing. And third point is that Turkey today increasingly opts for the use of force instead of diplomacy, and this is very much related to the growing armament industry in Turkey. Also, and the last point is that foreign policy making has become less institutionalized. What we see is a real fusion of external and domestic politics, which has rendered Turkish foreign policy very emotional, very conjunctural, incoherent, and inconsistent. Then why Turkey follows, I think the key question is this, why Turkey follows such a militarized, assertive, but at the same time arbitrary and emotional foreign policy? I see two reasons there. First of all, Turkey aspires to emerge as an independent regional power. Its security perception of Turkey is quite different from the EU's or Western security perception. The rise of Asia, China, Russia's growing regional activism, these are all opportunities for Turkey, not just threats. So this emergence of a multipolar world order gives Turkey and the Turkish political elite the opportunity to emerge as a more independent regional actor. Second reason is that Turkey considers threats in a different way. Now the changing environment around Turkey pushes Turkey to be more assertive, and there is this feeling of loneliness in Syria, in Eastern Mediterranean, and I'm sure we will expand on these points. And the last point that I want to emphasize is very much what Senem was mentioning is Turkish domestic politics. So Turkey follows a more assertive, militarized, and conflict-prone foreign policy, and this helps very much the government to consolidate its nationalistic base, but at the same time shift the attention from Turkey's domestic politics and economy to other issues and divide very much the opposition, because in such a nationalistic domestic environment, this assertive foreign policy already helps Erdogan to consolidate its power and divide the opposition. So in this context, going back to your question, could we really hope for the betterment of Turkey's foreign policy or a change in light of the developments that we see in 2021? No. In my view, this is just a tactical change, and there are several factors: fragile economy, but Biden administration change of stance vis-a-vis Turkey. These all play important role, and plus none of the issues that are on the table that are conflictual issues have changed or have resolved. So this make, in my view, a change or sustainable change in Turkish foreign policy quite difficult.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And lots of drivers and factors there. And I'm wondering, Isabel, if you could help us to unpack that a little bit more. We've heard about, multipolarity possibly driving Turkish foreign policy in a certain direction. We've heard about, the autocratization of the region, possibly serving as a factor as well. So, what do you see as being one of the more important factors behind Turkey's recent foreign policy turns? Is it more the ideological developments? Is it more power polarity? How do you see things?
The easy and quick answer is to say it's both. But first, I would like to react to what I've heard already and say that, at least from the Eastern Mediterranean, the perception is not one of the escalation of foreign policy of Turkey. Rather, I would say that from a Greek and Cypriot perception, and from those who are working on the EastMed pipeline, it's rather one of escalation, because exactly we see a Turkey that is more assertive, that is more ready to use force, that wants to be independent. And I think Turkey, like the EU, is trying to find its place in this multipolar world, and it is trying to be the hegemon in its region. it has always tried to play that role, and possibly today Turkey feels cornered by many of its neighbors. Possibly Turkey would say that it has been cornered. Its neighbors will say that it has chose to isolate itself, that it hasn't, reached out and tried to be multilateral, precisely because it has been inclined to be more unilateral in its action. And by wanting to be more of an independent force, it has come across as being confrontational and belligerent. And I think many of its allies are more used to coping with competition rather than confrontation. So they haven't been sure how to react to Turkey. And the EU has been one of these actors as well. I mean, the EU is a multilateral actor that has always, in its external action, tried to favor cooperation, maybe deal with some competition, but definitely doesn't really know how to deal with this confrontational attitude. Also for the EU, because it entered its relationship with Turkey through an association agreement and this EU enlargement perspective, it has connected what is going on inside Turkey. So the whole reforms for democratic reforms in Turkey with its external policy. It cannot decouple the two. While I think for Turkey, it would like for the EU to decouple what is going on inside Turkey and what's going outside, and view Turkey more as a strategic actor it's engaging with, or a trade actor, or I think Turkey today would rather have this transactional relationship that it has with the EU. But for the EU, because of the way that it has and the framework within which it works, and because of this European enlargement perspective that, I mean, clearly is at a standstill today, it is unable to decouple the two, and that definitely complicates the relationship. Then, of course, but we can come back to it later if you want, there is the actions of the individual member states, which are, I don't know if they are dividing Europe, because more or less they are following the same approach, but in different ways and to a certain degree with a different emphasis. But we can come back to that later if you want.
For sure. Thanks very much for helping us unpack that. Mikhail, over to you. Turkey is facing foreign policy pressures from the West, from the South, from the North, from the East. Which of these pressures do you see as being perhaps the most important in shaping Turkey's foreign policy calculations today?
Thank you for your question, and it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. I have three opening points to make. First of all, Turkey is an inter-regional power, and it is trying to expand that to create its own interconnectivity with Asia, with Africa, the Middle East. It turned to coercive diplomacy, and especially in 2016 after the coup. It started a little before, but Turkey had realized it needed to recalibrate. I outlined all of this in summer 2020. If you're interested, look at the summer 2020 issue of Turkish Inside Turkey. So it's no surprise the recalibration in 2021. You could have seen it. The rapprochement with Egypt, the dialogue with UAE, with Israel. It follows a certain strategic logic that I outlined. Yes, domestic issues, capacity is in hyperinflation that Turkey is entering on the border of right now. If you look at real inflation figures and the drop of the lira, yes, that all plays a part of it. But Turkey wants to advance this inter-regional agenda, which this is where I pick up with Isabel and said, Europe is not picking up that this is Turkey's program. The agenda the real question for Turkey is what will be the terms of engagement of their interregional architecture? Under the current AKP approach, especially since 2016, it's been articulated in a particular way, but it doesn't have to remain that way. And it could be articulated on different terms that are win-win. But the idea that Turkey is a transit state or Turkey is going to be some kind of junior partner, almost member to the EU, this is not Turkey's perspective. Point number two, if you look at the Eastern Mediterranean as a regional system, one more show and tell, my article in this book I edited, I lay it out. There are four major powers in the Eastern Mediterranean. In size order, Egypt, which we're seeing a new, bold, rising Egypt, Turkey, France, and Italy. Now, it's very complicated, especially when you look at the commercial picture, the economic picture, but the dividing line so far has been France and Egypt versus Turkey. And I also predicted that Italy would move over to France, which we've just seen. And so when we talk about Europe, it's very difficult to speak about Europe because Poland's view of Turkey is very different from France's view of Turkey. So we have to say that when we're looking at the Mediterranean, it is these four players. Obviously, Greece and Cyprus have very big influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Spain has a big influence, but it functions as a system. We have the Med-7 now, the Med-9, and it's those internal dynamics. So then let me just make one final point in my opening remarks on the Eastern Med. I agree with Isabella, excuse me. While we see this attempt at rapprochement with non-EU members, including the United Arab Emirates, which has a big impact since 2016 in the Eastern Med. I think Cyprus is going to be the definitive issue in 2022. Cyprus is the fork in the road for EU, Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that is a whole topic. We could spend hours and hours and hours just on the Cyprus issue itself, but I want to highlight that Turkey has interests in Africa that rival France. Turkey has important interests with Ukraine. It matches with Poland and Romania. We can get into that. Turkey also, on the interregional side, has emerged as an agenda setter in Central Asia with the success of the Karabakh War, has reshuffled the geopolitical deck of Eurasia, which brings, to my mind, actually opportunities for Washington, Berlin, and Brussels to work with Turkey. But we have to understand, Turkey is setting the agenda in Africa, in many ways, setting the agenda in Central Asia. And so from Turkey's point of view, they need a different kind of relationship and engagement. How that plays out locally in the Eastern Med is also very important. And right now, we're seeing the pressure with Russia and Ukraine. But what Turkey does vis-a-vis Ukraine will also depend on what is happening in the East Med and in other places.
Thanks very much for bringing in the Eastern European perspective as well. Obviously, as we all know, the Poles were the ones who came to the rescue when the Ottomans were at the gates of Vienna. So maybe there's a publication for you to author at some point on Polish-Turkish relations throughout modern history and how they've evolved. Could be very interesting, of course. But thank you for the segue into the Eastern Med, because before we expand to a wider geographic scope, let's talk a little bit about the East Med and developments there in recent months. So Senem, I'd like to go back to you. Back in June, we saw Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis and Turkish President Erdogan meet on the sidelines of the NATO summit at the time in an effort to mend ties, or at least put things on a little bit more even keel. But now in the wake of AUKUS, we've seen Greece sign up to a defense pact with France. So has anything substantial changed in your view? And do you see this French-Greek pact as a blip, or is this actually a more substantial shift in the relationship back towards a more adversarial dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come to that, but can I say a few things, Zach, before perhaps I respond to that? I mean, I think there's something that's very important to underline here. So, something that runs, through all of the interventions that have been made so far, and this is the fact that what Turkey is doing and what it has been doing, and this sort of lines up with what Michael has said as well, is that it's making use of the vacuum that there is in European foreign policy making, right? I think that's really what needs to be understood. And this is not just limited to Eastern Med, right? We haven't discussed Nagorno-Karabakh, for instance, but I think that's also a place where Europe as a whole, right, is completely absent. And so you only have Russia and Turkey. In Syria, you have a similar picture, right? I mean, elsewhere. So what we're seeing is that Europe not being able to unite in a, sort of a more concrete foreign policy, that's one problem, and that's a vacuum which Turkey uses to make inroads. But also, in addition to that, also disunity regarding how to deal with Turkey, and that's already been mentioned, right? I mean, you all have on the one hand, countries like Hungary, Poland, etc., and on the other hand, you have the French position or the Greek or Cypriot position, which are completely opposite one another. So I think so Turkey manages to haggle these divisions, both within the EU regarding the lack of a foreign policy and also within the EU regarding how they should be dealing with Turkey, right? And I think that's a very, very important point. Now, coming back to the case of the Eastern Mediterranean, yes, I mean, I do agree with Isabel, of course, that much of the conflict was escalated by Turkey and Erdogan. But when I talked about de-escalation, I was referring mainly to the more recent months that Zach asked about, because obviously during the summer, we did have a rather calm summer, I think, than many of us expected, right? I mean, we've been hearing again about some activity in October, like in early October or so, about some ships and things. But apart from that, I don't think there has been a sort of a major game changer there, at least for the time being. Now, about that deal that you've been mentioning, of course, it's been picked up by Turkey and also by the Turkish press, and also, of course, in negative light. But it hasn't created, let's say, a so-called a major earthquake effect, as well as Turkey itself, as Michael has also said, is also trying to make or to strengthen its alliances there and to get out of this isolated position. Now, much of what's going to happen in the Eastern Med, I think, as well as other regions, because of the state that the European Union is in, will have less to do with the position that Europe will take and more to do with the positions that individual actors will take and how they will relate to one another in terms of the major players. I'm afraid that's where we're looking at. And I'm afraid the EU, a third factor, I think, which makes it very difficult to EU to step in and make a difference here, of course, lies in the fact that Cyprus is already a member state. And that impedes any feasible solution on the island. Even if there is a domestic change of politicians and governments in Turkey, the position there will not change. Turkey might become less assertive maybe in some places, but the position on Cyprus will definitely not change. So we can't expect any realistic solution there. So a change will have to be brought by other means and alliances, which I think any next Turkish government will inherit from Erdogan's government as well. So there might be some continuity there that we might be looking into. So let me just stop there. Maybe others might want to chip into that.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I do want to give Isabel a chance to respond to something. I'm going to come back to the East Med in just a second, but you mentioned Nagorno-Karabakh. So Isabel, we've been hearing recently about the so-called 3+3 format, in which the three South Caucasus states would be entering into a dialogue with the three regional powers of Turkey, Russia, and Iran. I'm wondering where you think this leaves the European Union and its Eastern Partnership. Does it sideline the European Union in the region? Is the EU no longer really the term setter there, or is the EU basically just a complement, to the three South Caucasus states? But really, the three of them, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, are really focused a little bit more at this point on strategic dynamics related to their neighbors as it relates to hard power. What's your perspective?
But I think it's a clear example of Turkey wanting to be a hegemon in the region. I think it's a normal constellation. Of course, Turkey is going to want to be a hegemon in its region. I don't think it's not about sidelining the EU. The EU, independently of what Turkey may or not be doing in the region, needs to be more coherent in its response, and it's been extremely ambivalent. It's in its response. It's not that it's been weak. I think it's been very ambivalent, and you see fault lines in the EU's response to the point where I'm not sure we can even talk about an EU response per se, because you see even among the EU institutions a very different way of dealing with Turkey. So you see a European Commission that has concentrated very much on the migration control front, and already there you have the transactional relationship, but it is a mutually dependent relationship. I think it's important for Turkey as well, as much as it is for the EU. Then you see the divisions in the Council, even though there is a framework for sanctioning Turkey. Not that I think that sanctioning Turkey with a person like Erdogan as the head of Turkey would be the way to go, but there is a sanctioning mechanism every time. The fact that every time that the discussion about sanction comes up and then nothing really ends up happening is not very good for the credibility of the EU. And then you have a European Parliament that, well, maybe limited in its powers on foreign policy, but actually it is the one actor in the EU that has been extremely vocal about the need to ensure that fundamental values are respected in Turkey. It is the one actor that has really refused to decouple the internal with the external agenda, and has been extremely vocal in its debates, in its plenaries, in inviting President von der Leyen right after the visit to Ankara to discuss women's rights when Turkey withdrew from the Istanbul Convention. Even if you look at the latest report of the European Parliament, and actually good ideas there. And then again, you see the Commission really at the technical level wanting to support civil society, and the Parliament trying to also support that plan. But of course, you see at the member state level, at least 5 members with very clear agendas. And I think it's one of the only foreign policy issues where you see so many individual member states having their own agenda on an issue. So France, Italy, Germany, Greece, and Cyprus. I wanted to react to the deal, if I may, because the deal has been a very great game changer, I think, both for Greece and for France. At least this is how they perceive it. I think it's not really transactional. I think it's first of all France wanting to play a very key role in the Mediterranean, at least in the Eastern Mediterranean. The role in the Mediterranean it has always shared with Italy, but I think now France would like to be the key European state in the Eastern Mediterranean, and not only for the reasons of, you know, a difficult relationship with Turkey, but it does have its own interests with its intervention in Syria, with what's going on in Lebanon, with developments in the Sahel, the Libya issue. So it goes beyond Turkey, but also I'm sure it will come up later about its quest to have European sovereignty, as it calls it, which really is not only a discourse that it holds at the European level, but it is something that if you watch the news in France, it does come up. It is in the everyday discourse from different ministers even, about how can we promote our sovereignty. So we will see a more assertive France, I think, in that region. If I may say just a quick thing on the Cyprus issue, because it really worried me that Michael said that the key issue for 2022 will be the Cyprus issue, because I don't expect anything to happen on Cyprus in 2022. It's just the political constellation on the island on both sides of the divide is simply wrong. I don't think that Mr. Tatar is going to engage in anything. He has clearly stated his position to be a two-state solution, which is a non-starter for the Greek Cypriots and Greece. On the Greek Cypriot side, I mean, we have dare I say, a weakened president of the Republic of Cyprus. All of these memos have now been leaked from the Crans-Montana negotiations from 2017 that have weakened him on the Cyprus issue, but he's also weakened himself on the internal front on economic dossiers, and he's anyway on the way out. So we need to wait for who's next. And Turkey, yeah, I mean, I hope we don't have to wait until a post-Erdogan Turkey to make things move, because anyway, Erdogan has shown us that he has different faces. So I am hoping that the current face can change if he remains in power.
Okay, so let's go to Mikhail. You wanted to come in, and then we'll go back to Sam.
Sure. Yeah, very quickly, I'd like to tie. There are a few things put that actually all fit together. First of all, I agree with Sana that Turkey is very good at seizing opportunities for its agenda where Europe or the US has left space. That is strategic. People used to say Putin isn't strategic, he's an opportunist. Well, Churchill was the greatest opportunist, and I would not call him strategic, not strategic. So, and Nagorno-Karabakh is a great example. 29 years of stalemate. Turkey comes in and changes the situation. I think it's very important to understand the Turan euphoria that is in Azerbaijan and actually into Central Asia. Turkey now controls the social media in Azerbaijan. And as again, I'm saying that this idea of the organization of Turkic states, this has legs. Turkey, one of the most successful Turkish diplomacies has been energy diplomacy, infrastructure diplomacy across Central Asia, now combined with defense, where you're seeing everyone buy drones. So we see that very importantly, France is doing the logic of what France will do. It's one of the top 4 players. The EU has no presence, so a significant presence in the Eastern Mediterranean that is going to scare anybody. So France made this agreement. I remind you, with Greece, Greece had already made a treaty with the UAE, which has Article 5 mutual defense clause in it. Where we just had Medusa 11, right? The Egypt, Greece, Cyprus plus exercises. So Greece and Egypt are very close. France has a naval base in the UAE. France is Egypt's 3rd largest supplier of weapons. So these 3 have a strong relationship. They're a triple entente, what I call the triple on the French, Emirati, Egyptian entente, because they all work together to block the spread of Turkish influence in Africa. Egypt and UAE more concerned with Eastern Africa, Horn of Africa. France very much focused on Sahel and Western Africa. So, you know, from Turkey's point of view, is very logical to try to split Egypt, first of all, from France, because splitting that of those big 4, and also trying to split the UAE. Like I said, once you look at the economic relations, it's even more complicated. So, and therefore, Turkey Cyprus is the weak point because Cyprus is not a member of NATO. Cyprus has no navy. The arms embargo was in place on Cyprus until 2020. They have no capital warships. It's the soft point. So, you know, Turkey now will up the ante Will they get more recognition try to get international recognition for Cyprus? Will there be a popular referendum, Putin style or something like Crimea? But where the opportunity is, they'll push it, because the only weapon the EU has against Turkey is economic. But the point is, the EU, as a body, don't want to suffer the consequences of using that economic weapon, because Turkey is also a market for European exports. So, and then what I would say, if you really, one final point, if you're going to look at the Med as a system, you have to look at players. Take Spain. Spain has 60 billion euros approximately of debt exposure to Turkey. So this drop in the lira is disastrous for a Spanish banking system and Spain, even though BVNA is doubling down right now. So a country like Spain won't want to take punitive action against Turkey. They have tried to balance by reaching out to Egypt, and in 2021 they changed their policy. But you see the same with Malta. Malta had, because of Libya, had to turn to Turkey, signed it back when there was a GNA, signed a military agreement with the GNA with Turkey, because they're worried about illicit trafficking. And that shows a defense delivery deficit on the EU's part. If there was no deficit, Malta would not have turned. So I think a lot of places, what we see is that in some ways, it's the European Union is a disunion in the Eastern Mediterranean. It is a house divided. And so when you're talking about what can be done, we not only to look at Turkey, but as all of us have emphasized so far, the European Union needs to act in a coherent manner. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. Okay, we're going to move on in just a moment, but I want to just come back to Seda first and ask a question that's from our audience here concerning the consistency of Turkish foreign policy, perhaps in an eventual post-Erdogan age. And we, heard comments just now from Isabel and from Senem about, alluding to this question. So, in the wider Eastern Med region, whether it's Syria, whether it's Libya, whether it's questions related to UNCLOS or Cyprus, are we expecting a similar position, perhaps from a CHP government in the future on some of these issues, or not?
Maybe, very good question. Thank you very much. But maybe before answering this question, I want to emphasize two issues with regard to the Eastern Mediterranean. And then I will link this to the question. First of all, I think Turkey's posture, not only in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also in Syria, it's very much related to its security perception. First of all, what happened in the last 5-10 years around Turkey, the conflict in Syria, a massive influx of refugees to Turkey, destabilizing Turkish domestic politics, changing the whole demographic texture in Turkey. But also, and more importantly, YPG has become a very powerful, legitimate actor in Syria, which is armed, supported, and trained by the United States. And this is perceived as a real and direct threat to Turkish sovereignty. And there, Turkey has been left alone, actually, because we know that for NATO, PKK was a terrorist organization. It was recognized, it is recognized by the European Union. But YPG is a very legitimate actor. And there, Turkey feels quite lonely in its fight or in its legitimate right of defending its territory vis-a-vis YPG. issue, turning to the Eastern Mediterranean, it's a little bit the same issue in a different context. There, Turkey feels quite isolated. There is a new alignment between Cyprus, Egypt, Greece, Israel, and Europe, United Arab Emirates, which confront Turkey, basically. These countries have aligned under the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, which we haven't discussed so far in this setup, but this threatened Turkey's control areas in the Eastern Mediterranean. So part of Turkey's reaction, military buildup, reaction, is very much related to this loneliness in its region. The second point to me that's important to be emphasized, and Mikhail has mentioned already this, but I think we have to really emphasize this, that the nature of EU-Turkey relations has radically changed in the last 5 years or so, very much in parallel to Turkey's profound transformation. But not only this, there are also other factors that had an impact on the change of the nature of EU-Turkey relations. The EU is not in a position to offer Turkey anything. I'm not talking about the membership perspective, but nothing credible that would convince Turkey to follow EU stance in foreign policy or in other priority areas set by the European Union. And we know that Turkish ruling elite ideologically is not interested anymore or committed to the membership ideal anymore. In addition to this, the EU was not able to offer any up-to-date engagement framework with Turkey. I think this is very much the biggest problem we are facing right now, because the EU's leverage power vis-a-vis Turkey is non-existent. In parallel to this, EU member states have opted for a policy that would exclude Erdogan, and Mogherini used to say so very often, let's keep communication channels open with Turkey, but these communication channels have been used most of the time for solving crises in Syria or Eastern Mediterranean. And in a nutshell, what we see is since 2016, mutual interests and all the strategic priorities have guided EU-Turkey relations. This leverage power, the EU has tried to restore it in 2020 by offering a set of new incentives, but these are really in the form of renewed positive agenda or threatening Turkey with a set of sanctions in case Turkey crosses EU's red lines in the Eastern Mediterranean. And Turkey reacted to this and gave signals of its willingness to pursue a softer and less conflictual foreign policy. Well, Turkey avoided causing more tension with Greece and Cyprus, but really fundamental problems with Greece, and these are historical old problems, they are still on the table. With regard to Cyprus, Turkey's position has not changed. On the contrary, there's more conflictual and difficult to solve approach of Turkey towards Cyprus, two different states. That's very much put forward by Erdogan and by the palace. But I don't see how in the Cyprus next year there might be a move. Maybe these issues, best they will remain dormant, but I don't see a real solution. Going back to the question from the audience, post-Erdogan world. Well, I think either with Erdogan or without Erdogan, Turkey has serious problems that has to address in the medium term, starting from the economy to the foreign policy, but also the malfunctioning of the presidential system. But also Cyprus, obviously, it will be an issue. for Erdogan or a coalition government, or we will see what might happen in a post-Erdogan world. But I don't see really that in Cyprus there could be a solution in the medium term with Erdogan or without Erdogan. So because the nationalistic tie is there in Turkey, and it will be very difficult for an opposition party coming to power to take a different stance on Cyprus than Erdogan. But having said this, I think the tone would be definitely different, and the language would be definitely different than Erdogan.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our audience for posing questions on this, but we're going to shift now. We've entered the second half of our conversation, the second half of our allotted time, so please, for our audience, please stay with us until 12:30 Central European time, because now, having established how the two sides perceive each other in their immediate neighborhood, we'd like to unpack the wider strategic considerations that both parties are facing and where they may overlap to a certain extent. So let's just start with Isabel, because last week, of course, we saw the strategic compass, which we've been waiting for a long time, being presented in its first draft to EU foreign and defense ministers. In your view, where do you think Turkey fits into the EU strategic compass?
Well, the strategic compass is a guideline for the future and how the EU can become more autonomous in its action and working with its allies. If that indeed is the plan, and if indeed the EU leverage on Turkey is weak, which I do agree with that analysis, what I would hope to see is for the EU and the US working together on putting pressure on Turkey. I think, and I would say not through sanctions, but through aligning agendas, and maybe that is the way out of this situation. It has, I think it provides a way for the EU to become to assert itself as an actor on the scene. The strategic compass is also about that. It's about the EU saying, we are here, we have a plan for the future, do take us seriously. And now to pass to action, it is not so much about acting alone, but it's about acting with the right people. And I think with a Biden administration, the EU can do this, and I think let's say the positions of the Biden administration are in line both ideologically and in terms of interests for the EU to create an alliance with the US on Turkey.
Gotcha. Senem, we've seen this autumn not only the launch of the EU strategic compass, but also its Indo-Pacific strategy. So I'm wondering if you could help us understand, being in Istanbul right now, how are the Turks thinking about the Indo-Pacific region, if at all? And do you see any potential overlap between the interests of the European Union and Turkey in this vast region?
I mean, the Turkish foreign policy line, I think, regarding the region is a very pragmatic one and a very cautious one. Because, I mean, regarding relations with China, of course, they are aware of the huge asymmetry of the relationship, both economically, but also, of course, politically. And they're very wary of upsetting the Chinese, including, of course, being very silent on issues such as the case of the Uyghur minority. So there, I would say you get to hear more of a voice by the EU than by Turkey, which, you might expect more of an opposition to what's happening in China. So you don't see that. And I think that goes to show the tone and expectation of Turkey from China. And of course, in terms of the economic relationship, Turkey needs relations with China and Chinese investment. And I think, and it's happening. And of course, it doesn't come with no strings attached. I mean, I'm not talking about political strings here, economic strings. whose consequences will unfold more so in the future, as usually it does with Chinese investments. But I think the government does not think beyond that. So they're thinking more in short-term formulations. Now, I don't want to steer off topic, Zach, but I think there is an important point, I think, that's been underlined in the Q&A. And I think it's significant to touch upon that. Also, since we're talking about this sort of global state of EU-Turkey relations, but also Turkish foreign policy in general. You know, when we talk about, you know, continuity or change in Turkish foreign policy, you know, if an opposition comes to power or whatever happens in the next few years, I think we need to differentiate between the different foreign policy agendas and on where we can expect change and where we might not expect change. So it's important to be a bit nuanced in that argument, because if you look at, for instance, Cyprus, yes, I mean, I also don't expect change. And I also agree, Isabel, that, you know, I mean, I don't expect any efforts, you know, towards a solution or any substantial change in 2022. Although, of course, one can also always expect sudden sort of aggressive moves by Erdogan, such as deciding to annex the Turkish Cypriots or something. I know this sounds radical, but I mean, can we really completely delete this as a possibility? I don't think we can, right? Given, you know, what I've said at the beginning about the interface of domestic and foreign policy in particular, just before the elections, for instance, in 2023. So who knows, right? But there are certain foreign policy agendas where we can expect change. And I think the number one policy agenda there is Syria. And I think that's an important one. I think the opposition, the main opposition leader in particular, has hinted on various occasions, and people from his party has hinted on various occasions, that they might consider a dialogue with Assad. And, you know, and I think this would be a game changer. This would be super important. And I think they want to tie it with the return of migrants issue as well. And that's how they, I mean, and they also feel the security threat, as Seda has outlined at the beginning, regarding the YPG and the growing Kurdish autonomy in the north. But, you know, they think that they can deal with that through dealing with Assad. And since they don't have that baggage of the Syrian war on them, which it was basically AKP's making, that they feel like they can do that. And this is something that opposition can unite on, with the exception of the Kurds, of course, which is a different story. But I wanted to add that into the mix as well, because I think this is very important, and I see that the audience is interested in hearing more about that as well. Sorry if I got distracted a little bit.
No, not at all, because it actually helps us tie a whole bunch of issues together, and it's a perfect segue into a question I have for Michael, which is, you know, let's take a look at some of these different vectors of Turkish foreign policy. Senem just mentioned the Turkish-Chinese relationship. You know, perhaps in the terrestrial dimension, you know, you've written a lot about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the fact that it's allowed Turkey effectively to play a much more substantial role in the connectivity game across Central Eurasia effectively. But you were also talking before, you know, about some of the maritime dimensions of its foreign policy, not just in the East Med, but also, you know, into the Horn of Africa, and therefore by definition into the Indo-Pacific region. Right. So, you know, help us tie all of this together. Is there some sort of coherent Turkish strategy that ties these different regions together into some sort of Turkish strategic compass?
Yes, yes, there is. And so I'd like to talk about the Central Asia, Indo-Pacific, the IOR. I'll go through it with East Africa, and then the rest of Africa. I'll go through it real quick, because you can't understand the Mediterranean without understanding Africa. One controversial comment: the EU does not have an Indo-Pacific strategy. The only country with an Indo-Pacific strategy in Europe is France. The EU would like to develop an Indo-Pacific strategy, especially for EU connectivity with Southeast Asia is key. And that will probably happen via India. Okay, so I think Turkey is playing a very long game. Yeah, Sana mentioned the asymmetry, right? After the 2000, I just gave a lecture on this in Ankara this morning via Zoom. But if you want to see what I'm thinking, look at Nikkei, my remarks in Nikkei Asian Review. I published an article in January. Turkish Defense Review will be publishing these ideas in its December issue. So yes, after 2009, where Erdogan called the Urumqi riots, the reaction to the Urumqi riots, almost a genocide, it toned down. Turkey got money, got currency swaps. The BTK, the Trans-Caspian corridor. The only way China right now has to get to Europe without going through Russia is through the Trans-Caspian corridor that goes across the Caspian and then uses the Baku, Tbilisi-Kars railroad, and then China built the high-speed railroad across Turkey. So that was predicated on, okay, well, Turkey is going to keep its mouth shut more on the Uyghur issue, but also strategically from China's point of view, two inherent constraints. Russia would not allow greater Turkish presence in Azerbaijan because the way to get to Central Asia is from Baku. And then Turkey had no direct connectivity with Azerbaijan. They would have to go through Georgia. Those two things evaporated with the Nagorno-Karabakh war. Turkey is in a big way. Russia is allowing it. And now, because of this proposed corridor across Armenia, Turkey has, for the first time, direct connectivity. You have to understand it's momentous because the last time Turkey had this was just before the Soviet invasion of Baku 100 years ago. So the first time direct connectivity, and Turkey had already reconciled Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. Not an easy feat. They have been working at this for a while. We're seeing the takeoff stage. So if you zoom out for a minute and think of the Quad, right? If you can vision in your head, you know, US on the Pacific coast, Japan, Australia, India, kind of surrounding China by sea, well, the place that's open is Central Asia. But now if you put into that mental map of yours this organization of Turkic states, you could see a potential great power alignment, containment alignment, because Turkey now holds the balance also in Eurasia between China and Russia. And I think, as we've seen, Turkey is very good, as we've already said, playing sides off each other. Turkey will leverage that with Russia against China. And that's a space to watch. So I think that's how it affects. Now, Turkey's relationship with Pakistan is also a factor. And that's a very complicated, I'm a close watcher of Pakistan as well. So that relationship is going to be difficult because the ISI has its own interests, and Pakistan is not going to cede leadership to the Sunni world to Erdogan. So they're still working that out, but there's a lot of connectivity. But that brings us back to the Western IOR, because if you look, Turkey went from 2014, making the deal with Qatar to have a base, then Mogadishu in 2017. When Hulusi Akar opened that, he then went to Libya to try to get the deal with the GNA. The GNA refused. They only accepted it a year later. And then Turkey was going to get Suakin, or Sevakin, as you say in Turkish, but Suakin, the port on the Red Sea in Sudan. But Saudi Arabia and UAE flipped the game, and they lost that. That would have created a maritime triangle, right? From Qatar all the way Eastern IR through the Red Sea. I mean, that's why Egypt has been massively building up in the Red Sea. UAE, France, and Egypt have 7 naval bases on the African side, also Saudi Arabia. Then you go all the way up to Cyprus. So, but the breakout point was Libya, because now they lost Sudan, but they have Libya. And it's huge because now Egypt and Greece cannot create a cordon sanitaire and close off the Mediterranean. So strategically, it was very important. But then you have Africa. So, and I'm an associate senior fellow or senior policy fellow in ECFR for Africa. And I can tell you, Africa is the future. 42% of all young people live in Africa. By 2025, Africa will have over 100 cities with more than 1 million people, a 3rd times greater than the EU. So China, even Russia, EU, Turkey, UK, US, Japan, plus the Gulf states, Qatar, UAE, are all looking at Africa, India too. So, and the EU needs to get into this game. So France knows this, Italy knows this, even Spain has been waking up to it. So that's part of the Mediterranean game. But Turkey has a huge footprint, not just militarily. It's not just the base in Somalia, and base in Libya, and now training in Niger, but commercially. Turkey is the largest employer in Algeria. It dominates the steel industry. It created one of the largest textile factories in the world in Algeria. They've created steel factory in Senegal. They created furniture factory for all these new people that are integrated with the Algerian steel and fabrics. They're in Angola. They needed iron, so they bought iron mines in Angola. So Turkey, you know, you can look at it as haphazard. Yes, you can see families run things, etc., but you can see a coherent, continual advance. And so I think the EU has to see whether it can work with Turkey or not, because you can sort of see right now the number one player in Africa is China, and Turkey is EU has lost out quite a bit, and EU wants to reset its Africa policy. Well, that might create an opportunity with Turkey if both parties can figure out something. And as again, also in the Pacific, Asia-Pacific, Central Asia, the Eurasian scheme. I want to throw one wild card into the situation. Of course, there are a lot of them, but one not to underestimate, and that's Armenia. I think right now, Turkey has a golden opportunity, Turkey and Azerbaijan together, to reconcile with Armenia. And if it was done with the right tone and right manner, it could totally be an image reset for Turkey in many ways. So even though we might think the Armenian issue is very small, I think if Turkey had a reconciliation, let's say even a truth and reconciliation commissions, whatever, I'm not getting into the G word, but if there was something like people went, wow, this is a new era, I think that would spill out into the Cyprus issue. I think it would spill out in many other ways. Now, it could be an opportunity that's lost, but if the EU wanted to do something, maybe facilitating a very positive reconciliation that would have constructive spillover effects, could actually get you quite a lot of bang for your euro. I know we can't say bang for the buck, so bang for the euro.
Just a quick question of clarification, because a lot of people are thinking about China these days, and you mentioned the possibility that there could be some sort of not just quad, but effectively a quint, if you include the Turkic world, that could have China surrounded. But a lot of the discussion that we've had so far today has talked about how the challenges between the EU and Turkey and their relationship have, in many respects, been quite profound, if not on a fundamental level. So under what circumstances do you think that Turkey would even agree to play a role in such a coalition, or rather is it simply the power that they would naturally embody, and you're not talking about a formal alignment of sorts?
Alliances are different from alignments. I think you could see, for example, Turkey is always trying to optimize its position, as I said, as an interregional actor. There are multiple discourses in Turkey about Eurasia. Anyhow, Russia is facing a demographic problem. Last year, Russia lost 1 million people. Russia is also Turkifying. So Russia itself has to be eyeing playing off Turkey and China. There is the Iranian factor, that Iran was admitted to the SCO. But in this mix, the country that really, aside from Russia and China, that could exert a third force presence, as I call it, is Turkey. Now, Turkey still needs to build up more capacity in that way, but it is happening. Like Turkey built the port in Turkmenbaşı. It built the infrastructure. It's doing things in several countries. At the same time, China is trying to consolidate and use Afghanistan. So that's a big picture. So where, US and EU, this big, Afghanistan is the big black hole of Eurasia right now. It needs to be contained. Look at the Syrian problem. It's been primarily contained by old-fashioned great power politics. As far from perfect, and it's certainly not good for the Syrian people, but it's not the black hole that we have in Afghanistan. So, there could be something there, and maybe it'll involve a negotiation, Turkey, Russia, and China together is also there. But Turkey, because of the ethnic ties, and the possibility of even I hate to use the word secular, but I'm not talking about kind of a grand Islamist vision, but a kind of a certain kind of modernist pan-Turkic vision. That's the only thing that is a serious threat to China moving westward. So in this dynamic will come into play, and it raises opportunities. But not just Turkey is not going to be just NATO's subcontractor on the Eurasian continent. What this needs is a really good, big view, strategic think, grand bargain. But that also means the EU needs to think on a grand strategic level and have the capacity to do it. I'll finally wrap up with this. There is only one place where the EU has capacity, and that's the European Green Deal, which is a $1 trillion Marshall Plan to combat climate change in Europe, but also abroad. It's the only place, I've recommended that the new global gateway strategy be combined with the EGD. And look, Turkey, just to bring it back home to Turkey, Lake Tuz dried up entirely. 60% of Turkey's landmass is vulnerable to desertification. I'm about to publish an article this week on Turkey's food crisis. It might surprise me, Turkey is the third largest wheat importer in the world. So climate change, it's not just the wildfires we saw in the summer, right? Those severe weather events, which really, the Eastern Med doesn't create a lot of climate problems, carbon problems, but they're one of the most vulnerable, and Turkey is highly vulnerable. It's driving a lot of the pressure right now on Turkey that's causing inflation, causing food prices, and that's only going to get worse. And since the EU is already on board with this agenda, I think engaging, first of all, in East Med climate diplomacy, positive is one of the first things the EU can do easily, and try to reset some of the terms by creating win-win cooperation, stakeholder cooperation across conflict lines, because we saw the wildfires don't carry passports, right? So wildfires were in Greece, wildfires were in Cyprus, wildfires were in Turkey. Climate change doesn't know a passport or a border. So, and they're all interconnected systems. So if the EU has a hard time thinking outside of what it's used to, but EU is already doing this. So if we had to pick one place, well, aside from encouraging this Armenia reconciliation, I think serious financial partnerships, not just dumping money, but serious joint venture partnerships in renewables, infrastructure, irrigation, green agriculture. We have the farm to fork policy. By the time if you don't do it now, it's going to be too late, because this is projects take time. So the time to do that is now. And I think that would also help create at least an alternative dialogue between Turkey, its East Med neighbors, and the EU. You've already seen this Israel-Jordan deal with desalination for renewable energy. There are many other ways. You have the Euro-Asia connector between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, the Euro-Africa connector. These are massive electricity interconnections, the Euro-Africa from Egypt, Cyprus, Greece. And the EU is not really part of that. The EU could be involved and be a force to reset the tone.
Thanks very much. We're running short on time, so I'm going to go to Senem first, then over to Isabel, and finally we're going to wrap it back up here in studio. Senem, my question for you is that EU-Russia relations in recent years have been rooted in very different visions for Eurasia. The Eurasian discourse has really come into it, right? You've seen the EU talk about the need for common rules, etc. You've seen, the greater Eurasian partnership vision in Moscow, which is rooted in political pluralism by contrast, right? So there really is, there really are fundamentally different visions there. I was wondering if you could talk about the EU-Turkey relationship and that Eurasian dimension. Do you think that there's a possibility for more overlapping interests or visions or norms between the EU and Turkey on that geographic scale than there are between the EU and Russia?
Well, there could be, but to be able to talk about that, I think first we need to be discussing whether or not the EU has actually a vision for these countries and for that region. So I'm afraid I would have to agree with Michael there, because I don't think there is a unified vision over which we can discuss whether or not this can be something that Turkey can actually work with. Now, and on top of that, in terms of Turkey and Russia, for instance, since you mentioned Russia, I think it's also important to underline that Turkey's relationship with Russia is also a very fragile one. It's a very asymmetric type of cooperation that works in some areas and that doesn't work in others. And it depends a lot on the personal relationship between Erdogan and Putin. That also extends to some shady, political economy a bit, which I don't want to get into, but I guess everybody knows. So it's a kind of relationship that can work, for Europe in the future, but also that can work against it, depending on how Turkish domestic politics goes and also how Turkey-Russia relations develop. Because I think that also depends a lot on Turkish domestic politics. Now, much of all that we've been discussing here in all these regions, Michael, I think, gave a great expose of this. And he talks about these possibilities, but they depend first, of course, on a more unified, let's say, as much as possible European position. But also in discussing all of these, I don't think we should underestimate the turmoil that Turkey is in right now. Because right now it lacks the political and the economic capacity to do many of the things which we think that it might be able to do. Take the case of Armenia. I agree with Michael that once the Nagorno-Karabakh deal was settled, what I was thinking, after the most recent conflict that happened, my thinking was that Turkey could use this as an opportunity to initiate a sort of a reconciliation with Armenia. And I think that's a real possibility, because I think this is something that Turkey now feels more ontologically secure. We have to use the academic parlance here, since I'm an academic, that it can make inroads there. But it's there, right? It's a possibility, but it needs to be taken up on. But right now, I don't think Turkey is in a state to pursue that, and disregarding all of whatever is happening inside. And about the larger, region again, Eurasia, but Africa, I think Michael was right in underlining the importance of Africa. There's something that Europe also needs to observe here, and this is important. Turkey is not just present in places like Africa, and also in the Western Balkans and elsewhere and all these other regions that have been mentioned, but it also contests the European Union, right? So it's not just present pursuing its own agenda, but it pursues its agenda with often direct references to European presence and in actions that try to delegitimize the European Union from these neighborhoods on which it's active. And we see that in Africa, but I think we also see it increasingly in the Western Balkans, where the EU seems to be, and I see Andrea de Muntar's question there, and I think it's very important, and we haven't talked about it. I know we don't have much time to talk about every single region, but I think there also it's sort of carving up a space for itself. And this is not just, in terms of policies, in terms of its economic relationship with Serbia, Bosnia, etc., but also in terms of a normative space that it's opening up for itself by reminding what happened in the 1990s, that it's going to use its special relationship with the authoritarians of the region, in the Balkans, a leader of the Bosnian Serbs, etc., that it's going to use them to the advantage of the Bosnian Muslims, because obviously Europe will not do this because it hasn't done it earlier as well, because that's not going to happen. And it uses a sort of a more different sets of, but still, discourse that feeds on this time from identity, history, religion, all that kind of stuff in Africa. And that somehow works. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's there. And it's used in direct relation to the European Union, in direct contestation of the European Union. And obviously Russia does that too. And we can't, obviously compare Russia and Turkey in terms of their global aspirations and in terms of their power status. But still, I think it's important to note that we're looking at a similar type of contestation, maybe more focused in some areas than others, but also trying to carve a normative space through which it tries to dethrone the EU, right? Wherever it's trying to be active. I think this is important. And the more the EU cannot face a unified, or formulate a unified, coherent front on this, the more that we're going to see this happening. And of course, given the fact that Turkey, continues the way it is, and we don't expect any major changes. I think it's important to underline that. Let me see. I've taken some notes on this, but yes, I think that's what I'm going to say. So yes, I mean, cooperation is possible, but it's very difficult under the current circumstances. And one other thing. We mentioned the EU-Turkey migration deal. Again, going back to Seda's point, I don't think we should underestimate how important this is, or what kind of a leverage that this gives to the Turkish policymakers. And I think this is going to continue the way it is, unless Europe finds somehow a way of distributing the burden and coming up with a coherent asylum policy of some sort. We've seen this in Belarus, we've seen it in Turkey, and we'll see it elsewhere. I mean, these conflicts will not subside over day and night, and they will continue. So this will have to be resolved. And I think the EU, in thinking about the future, has to prepare itself for any potential changes in Turkey in the next 5 years. And those potential changes, of course, they might show themselves, we've discussed that more so in some regions than in others, but there will be one constant. In the case that opposition comes to power in any shape and form and constellation, they will want to renegotiation of this migration deal. And they will want it to look like something that it doesn't look like right now. And I don't think the EU is contemplating these possibilities. I don't think it's thinking ahead in terms of how it's going to form Turkey's, the future of its Turkey relationship beyond membership, etc. But I think it's time that it starts thinking about these issues before late. Sorry.
Excellent. As you're a SEPS alumna, you're very aware of our mandate of thinking ahead for Europe. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Indeed, just before I ask a question to Isabel, I've noticed that there are some questions in the Q&A for Mikhail and also for Seda. So if you have not yet done so, feel free to tackle those just in written form and reach out to our question posers directly. Isabel, I want to just give you the opportunity to respond to a couple of things. Number one is the assertion that we've heard from Senem and Mikhail so far that the EU effectively does not have a strategy as it relates to these wider regions farther afield. What do you think on that front? Do you think that there is some sort of strategic awareness, for example, in Brussels with regards to the connection between, say, the issue of Turkey and the East Med and then the wider Eurasian and Indo-Pacific dimension? Simply geographically speaking, the East Med and the Indo-Pacific are, next to each other geographically by way of the Suez Canal, right? So I'll let you tackle that, and then the second point, which Senem had just raised, which is the fact that there are some effectively strict limits on the ability for deep strategic cooperation between the EU and Turkey right now, and part of that is limited to is related to disunity within the European Union. I'm wondering what you think this would imply for the EU's ability to be able to transform itself into a more genuine pole, a more robust pole in today's emerging multipolar world by way of unlocking cooperation with strategically placed actors across the Eurasian supercontinent, including Turkey.
Yeah, big questions. And listening to everyone, we forget the nature of the EU. The EU is not a state. And of course, it's not a cohesive actor. It's a multilateral framework like many others that exist with a very strong tie, a stronger tie among its member states, but it is not a state. And, listening to Mikhail and his comments, and I understand why he makes these comments, because he is truly a geopolitical mind, and that shows how little of geopolitics the EU is doing and how not geopolitical the European Commission is. And I think it's not because it's not equipped to be. And, you know, the EU is faced today with a world that's multipolar, but that has clear fault lines, and that wants the other parts of the world to align in a for or against mode. And the EU is not yet ready to do this. It's looking for a compromise, as it always has, because it is, as I said, a framework of cooperation. So even when you look at its relationship with China, it wants, you know, on the ideological front to be against it, but then on trade to be more on the cooperation front. And that makes it not coherent in its action. And this is how it deals with it with actors. It's not dealing with it like the other major powers. On Africa, because Africa was mentioned, I would think that the EU is not yet ready to work with Turkey on Africa. This is not how it's organized its work, and it's not about choosing between China or Africa to work in that area, but rather it's chosen to work with its African partners and upgrade that relationship and give more responsibility to the local actors. If it cannot work more closely with Turkey if there's not an element of trust. So I understand that the EU needs to be more coherent and take a step towards Turkey, but you know, Turkey also needs to make a step and move beyond transactionalism, show that it wants to work with the EU. It has not shown that it wants a collaborative relationship with the EU. It's purely transactional and it's competitive at best. And it's a pity, because I do agree with Michael that the green agenda is an agenda with great potential, and where Turkey and the EU could work. And we have seen in the Eastern Mediterranean that it can work at moments of crisis, because there are no borders, because you need to ensure survival. Of course, you're going to help your neighbor. So it would make sense, and I think that should be the plan for the future, to create those bridges, if only at the emergency level, that something unclicks and the region can work together on the agenda. In the meantime, I would see it mostly in the framework of confidence building measures. And even on the Cyprus issue for 2022, which I hope will not be as catastrophic as Senem said could be, I don't see annexation of the north part of Cyprus happening. And I don't think actually that the European Union would sit idle if something like that would happen. I think that would really be testing the EU if Turkey did something like that. And I think Turkey could even be surprised by what the reaction would be. So I hope there won't be that test. But, you know, even let's say the dirty energies like the gas, which we didn't talk much about today, which could be sort of a transitional dirty energy towards while we're developing the renewable sources. I think this is something that the region could capitalize on, and Turkey as well. And I'm currently working on a publication that's looking at how we could integrate this in confidence building measures. But there are opportunities and, you know, medium steps to build this relationship of trust, but without trust and without both sides moving towards it, we are not going to see EU-Turkey relations moving in a positive manner.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to reading your publication, of course. Seda, just to finish with you in 90 seconds, if you don't mind, just help us bring this conversation home based on what we've heard so far, based on the different strategic pressures that the EU and Turkey are both facing. What does this imply for the future of EU-Turkey cooperation, the future of EU foreign policy, the future of Turkish foreign policy?
I will link this to the strategic compass, if you allow me. When Borrell introduced last week the strategic compass to the Council, in his personal foreword, the first sentence reads as, "Europe is in danger." And actually, he enlisted potential threats to the European Union. And although he did not name Turkey, he emphasized that alternative models to the EU, what Senem was mentioning, in terms of values, approaches to the international system, constitute a real threat to the European Union. Then the key question I think Brussels needs to answer is whether Turkey belongs to the group of those countries which pose a threat to the European Union, or is it a partner which can collaborate with the European Union on many issues of common interest? I think that's a key issue. In the long term, I agree with Isabel, collaboration with the European Union is dependent on Turkey's democratization process with Erdogan or in a post-Erdogan Turkey. Normalization in Turkey is needed, it's a must. But again, I would tend to agree with Senem, is Brussels ready for a post-Erdogan Turkey? My reading is that Brussels is not ready for such a change. And in the short to medium term, not only for Turkey, but for the neighborhood in general, the challenge for the Union is finding a way to deal with the autocrats in the neighborhood, in my view. Of course, areas of cooperation are possible with Turkey, but I will not go through all this list. But I think one thing was not mentioned is the acquisition of Turkey of S-400, which is key. I think collective thinking, creative thinking is needed how to solve this problem and ensuring Turkey's commitment to NATO. Then Libya, Syria, might be also other areas where Turkey and the EU in the short term might collaborate. Also taking advantage of Turkey's offer to help with Ukraine might be also another area where parties might work. But step by step, baby steps for changing the momentum in EU-Turkey relations. But in parallel to this, preparing in Brussels for a post-Erdogan Turkey, I think this is a crucial point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that thought-provoking note, I think it's a great place to conclude the conversation. I want to thank all four of our fantastic panelists for joining us today. We're in the middle of a flurry of events right now at SEP, so I just want to draw your attention to some of them that are going to be taking place later today and tomorrow. Today at 3:30 p.m. Central European Time, we're going to be hosting a webinar called Resettlement, Complementary Pathways in the Global Compact on Refugees, which is, of course, very much relevant to the discussion that we've just had on EU-Turkey relations just now. And then tomorrow, we have got a fantastic, and there's also earlier today at 2 o'clock, we've got an economic governance review event, what rules for the post-pandemic environment. Finally, tomorrow, our foreign policy unit will be having two events, very much timely, and we're going to be staying in the wider Balkan region, as it were. At 9 o'clock a.m., we're going to be looking at whether the revised enlargement methodology of the European Union is delivering. And then right after that, at 11:30 a.m., good governance and resilience of the justice sector reform in the Western Balkans. So a whole number of events that we're going through right now just shows indeed the number and the complexity of the challenges that the world and the European Union are both dealing with right now. And it's a great opportunity to reflect upon those. So we were very grateful today to be able to have the four of you to help us reflect on those. So Isabel Ioannidi, Senem Aydin Dugit, Michael Tanchum, and Sadr Gurkan, thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward to hosting you again here at SEPS very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.